November 1558, St. James's Palace. The doctor stepped back from the body of the Queen of England, not in grief, but in silent, wide-eyed horror. For months, Mary had sworn she felt the air of England moving inside her womb. What they found instead had no heartbeat, no lungs, no future. It had teeth, it had hair. It had been growing inside her, feeding off her body like a parasite wearing a crown. This is not the story of Bloody Mary the Tyrant. This is the autopsy she never wanted anyone to see. Here is the detail that rewrites everything you thought you knew about Mary I. Her body did not lie to her doctors. It performed. By November of 1554, just months after her marriage to Philip of Spain, the royal physicians of England signed off on what they believed was a confirmed royal pregnancy. The Queen's abdomen was swelling. Her menstrual cycle had stopped completely. She reported nausea in the mornings and tenderness across her chest. Every clinical marker that 16th century medicine recognized as proof of life inside the womb, Mary had them all. The problem was that none of it was a child. What was actually happening inside her body was something that modern oncology would classify as a slow biological coup. An ovarian teratoma, a germ cell tumor capable of producing its own hair, its own calcified tissue, and, in advanced cases, structures resembling teeth and bone, had been quietly growing inside her pelvic cavity, and it was hijacking her endocrine system with terrifying efficiency. These tumors are capable of secreting hormones that mirror pregnancy at a biochemical level. Elevated estrogen, disrupted progesterone cycles, and in some documented cases, measurable levels of human chorionic gonadotropin, the exact hormone that confirms pregnancy on a medical test. Mary's body was not imagining a child. It was manufacturing the chemical signature of one. The court did not know this. No one in 1554 could have known this. What they knew was that the Queen of England was expecting the heir that God and Rome had promised, and that Hampton Court Palace was already being prepared for the royal birth. Crowds gathered outside the palace gates in April of 1555, waiting for the cannon fire that would announce a prince. Ladies-in-waiting stood on rotation outside the Queen's chamber. Philip of Spain, a man who had no particular warmth for his English wife, stayed close, because that child was the entire geopolitical justification for their marriage. The cannon never fired. The court quietly, almost invisibly, stopped mentioning the heir. No formal retraction was ever issued. No doctor signed a document admitting the mistake. The swelling simply receded. Mary, visibly hollowed by humiliation, watched her husband board a ship back to Spain within weeks of the pregnancy's silent collapse. He would not return to England for over a year. But here is what history glossed over in its rush to call Mary simply hysterical or delusional. The tumor did not leave with the embarrassment. It stayed. It continued to grow. And by 1557, it had become something that even the walls of St. James's Palace could not contain. By 1557, Mary I was 41 years old and looked 20 years older. Contemporary accounts, including dispatches written by the Venetian ambassador Giovanni Michiel, who had direct access to the English court, described a woman whose face had become gaunt and deeply lined, whose eyes were sunken, and whose complexion carried the gray undertone of someone whose body was consuming itself from the inside. She had chronic pain that her physicians attributed to melancholy. She had episodes of blindness. She could not sleep without waking in cold sweats, and yet she announced to her court that she was pregnant again. This time something was visibly wrong in a way that could not be explained away. The swelling in her abdomen was not the symmetrical, rounded shape associated with a developing child. It was asymmetrical, hard in places where it should have been soft. The ladies who attended her in private described, in whispered accounts that survived in fragmentary court records, a belly that seemed to shift and press outward in irregular patterns. Not the rhythmic movement of a kicking infant, but something slower. Something that pushed against the skin in ways that made the women in that room lower their eyes and reach quietly for their rosaries. What they were witnessing, without any framework to understand it, was a malignant teratoma in an advanced stage of growth. These masses are not static. They press against surrounding organs. They cause referred pain across the abdomen and lower back. In advanced cases, internal necrosis begins. Tissue within the tumor starts to die and decay while the patient is still alive, producing internal decomposition that the immune system cannot stop. The smell, documented in cases of advanced ovarian malignancy, has been described by modern forensic pathologists as distinctly organic and sweet in a way that is profoundly wrong, detectable even through clothing. Mary's court chose silence. Her doctors chose deference. and the tumor chose to keep growing until November of 1558 when there was nothing left to defer to. Mary I died on November 17, 1558 at St. James's Palace. The official cause recorded by her physicians was influenza, compounded by what they described as a prolonged fever. That explanation was accepted publicly, repeated in court documents, and allowed to calcify into history without challenge. What was not recorded publicly, what existed only in fragmentary physician notes and second-hand accounts that survived the deliberate purge of sensitive royal documentation, was what those same physicians encountered when they prepared her body. The smell reached them before they had fully opened the abdominal cavity. Forensic pathologists who have studied advanced-stage ovarian malignancy describe the internal decomposition of necrotic tumor tissue as something that precedes death. The mass begins rotting while the patient still breathes, producing gases and liquids that the body cannot expel. The physicians who examined Mary were not prepared for what that meant in practice. What they found was a mass of calcified and necrotic tissue embedded in the pelvic cavity, irregular in shape, containing structures that did not belong in a human reproductive system. Hardened formations, dense calcified nodules, tissue that had organized itself into configurations that the medical vocabulary of 1558 had absolutely no language for. A malignant ovarian teratoma in its terminal stage is one of the most visually disturbing findings in all of gynecological pathology. These tumors develop from germ cells, the same cells responsible for building an entire human being. And in their malignant form, they produce bone fragments, calcified protrusions, and masses of compressed hair and degraded tissue that, when pressed against the inner wall of the abdomen, create irregular, hard shapes, visible and palpable from the outside. What Mary's ladies-in-waiting described as a baby moving in wrong directions was the tumor's calcified edges shifting against her abdominal wall. The physicians who confirmed this finding did not publish their conclusions. One left England within months under circumstances that were never formally explained. Another died of a sudden fever before the year ended. Whether that is coincidence or consequence, the archive does not say with certainty. But the body was sealed, fast completely, and without the public viewing that royal tradition demanded. And that silence speaks with the clarity of a confession. The question that forensic history cannot ignore is not what killed Mary I. The question is who decided that no one could ever know. Because the concealment of what was found inside that body was not passive. It was deliberate, rapid, and executed with the precision of people who understood exactly what was at stake. Mary's entire reign had been built on a theological promise. She had reversed the English Reformation, returned England to Rome, and justified every execution, nearly 300 of them, in the name of a Catholic God who had, she insisted, chosen her to restore his church. The pregnancy was not merely personal, it was doctrinal. The heir growing in her womb was, in the language of her court, evidence of divine favor. If that heir was revealed to be a malignant mass of necrotic tissue, teeth, and calcified bone, the theological architecture of her reign collapsed with it. The burnings at Smithfield, the persecution of Protestant clergy, the subordination of England to Rome, all of it retroactively stripped of divine sanction by a tumor. The body was placed inside a soldered metallic casket within hours of death. The dense metallic lining was sealed without the ceremonial public viewing that English royal tradition required. No formal lying in state. The justification offered was infection risk from the fever that had supposedly killed her. But Mary had died of fever before. She had survived fevers her entire life. The speed of the sealing and the absence of the viewing suggest that someone in that palace had seen what the physicians had seen, and understood that a single witness with a loose tongue could unravel everything. The toxic mineral paste she had applied to her face and neck for years, the heavy metal pigments that court portraiture required, the corrosive mineral agent that Tudor women wore as a symbol of pale aristocratic beauty, had already destroyed her skin, her teeth, and contributed to the systemic organ failure that made her body an accelerated ruin by her early 40s. The sealed casket was not just a precaution. It was the final layer of a cover-up that had been building since 1554. Mary I was not destroyed by her enemies. She was not destroyed by Elizabeth, or by Protestant rebellion, or by the husband who left her. She was destroyed by her own biology, operating in a century that had no tools to understand it, inside a political system that could not afford to acknowledge it. She spent the last 4 years of her life convinced that God was giving her a child. What God, or biology or chance, had actually given her was a germ cell tumor that mimicked the one thing she wanted most in the world, extracted everything her body had left to give, and left her physicians standing over an opened abdominal cavity in horrified silence. The medicine that today names this condition, scans for it, and in many cases treats it successfully. That medicine did not exist for her. What existed was prayer and political necessity and a soldered metallic casket that closed over the truth before anyone outside that room could see it. If you made it to the end of this one, you are exactly the kind of person this channel exists for. Most people scroll past the history that was deliberately buried. You stayed for the autopsy. Subscribe to Vane's Historical Vault because every case we open is one that someone, somewhere, tried to permanently close. Drop a comment with the detail that hit you hardest. The forensic evidence from these cases only gets sharper when more people are examining it. And if you found this valuable, the like button is the fastest way to make sure the algorithm doesn't bury this the same way the palace tried to bury Mary. See you in the next case.